When I bought my lake property 3 years ago, one of the biggest selling points wasn't just the view of the water or the space for my workshop, it was that the land sat outside of the local homeowners association. I'd done my homework. I'd lived in neighborhoods before where HOAs dictated everything from the shade of paint you could use on your mailbox to whether you could park a pickup truck in your own driveway. This time, I wanted peace, privacy, and the freedom to live without someone measuring my grass with a ruler. And for a while, it was exactly what I wanted. My cabin was a little rustic, but I loved it. I parked my truck by the side, built a small shed for tools, and even strung up some outdoor lights for the evenings. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. And best of all, no one could tell me what to do. Well, almost no one. Enter Karen. Karen lived in the HOA subdivision that bordered the far side of the lake. If you picture a stereotypical HOA president with a permanent scowl, a clipboard in hand, and an obsession with everyone else's business, that was her. She wasn't just a board member, she was the self-proclaimed sheriff of the neighborhood. She believed that if something happened within sight of the HOA, then she had authority over it. My first encounter with her was almost laughable. I was unloading supplies one weekend, bags of mulch, some lumber, and a set of patio chairs, when Karen strutted over. She had the power walk of someone who had rehearsed being in charge. "Excuse me," she said, holding up a paper. "You can't have that truck parked in the driveway overnight. It violates HOA guidelines." I blinked, confused. "What guidelines? I'm not in your HOA." She frowned like I'd just spoken another language. "Of course you are. Everyone in this area is. We have standards to maintain, and trucks lower property values." That's when I explained, politely, at first, that my property wasn't covered by the HOA. I showed her my deed, which clearly marked my land outside the boundary lines. She didn't want to hear it. She huffed, muttered something about people trying to get around the rules, and stormed back to her side of the lake. I figured that was the end of it. It wasn't. The next weekend, I found a folded piece of paper taped to my cabin door. It was an official violation notice from the HOA. According to Karen, my shed was an unapproved structure, my lights were unsightly, and my mailbox was not HOA compliant. The kicker? At the bottom, it said I owed $150 in fines. I actually laughed out loud. It was so absurd that I thought it had to be a prank. But the more I looked at the wording, the more I realized Karen was dead serious. She really believed she had power over me. Over the next few weeks, her harassment escalated. She would stand on the edge of my property, taking photos with her phone, scribbling notes on her clipboard. She left more notices about violations and fines. One even complained that my grass was too tall, despite the fact that I had. The first escalation came in the form of new violation notices. Unlike the flimsy printout she'd taped to my door the first time, these came on official-looking HOA letterhead. Clearly, she had gone back to the board, gotten access to the association's stationery, and decided to use it against me. One notice claimed that I owed $300 in accumulated fines for failure to comply with architectural standards. Another accused me of operating a business out of my shed because I sometimes had deliveries of lumber or tools. She even wrote that my outdoor string lights constituted light pollution. Each time, I responded the same way. I ignored the notices, or when I felt generous, I stuck a photocopy of my deed to the envelope and mailed it back to the HOA office with the words, "Not in your jurisdiction." But ignoring her only seemed to fuel her determination. Karen started taking photos of my property whenever she thought I wasn't looking. I'd catch her standing on the roadside, zooming in with her phone. Once, she even crouched behind some bushes to get a shot of my backyard. When I confronted her about trespassing, she said, "I'm documenting violations. You'll thank me one day when this community keeps its standards." I told her point blank, "Karen, I'm not in your community. You have no authority here. Keep off my property." That should have ended it. But Karen's ego couldn't process being told no. Soon, she turned to the community itself. At HOA meetings, she began spreading stories about me, claiming I was bringing down property values, that I was. Eventually, Karen decided that enough warnings and fines had been ignored. She needed to make a statement, and in her mind, the best way to do that was to drag me into court. I'll never forget the day the summons showed up in my mailbox. Karen had officially filed a lawsuit claiming that I was in violation of HOA rules and owed thousands in unpaid fines. Her complaint was a thick packet full of her photos, handwritten notes, and printouts of the violation notices she'd made up. Honestly, I laughed when I read through it. The whole case was built on a fantasy that the HOA had jurisdiction over me when my deed, title, and county zoning maps all proved otherwise. Still, I wasn't going to take it lightly. I gathered my documents. My property deed. The county plat map clearly marking the HOA boundary. A letter from my title company confirming I had no HOA encumbrances. When the court date arrived, Karen showed up looking smug, strutting into the courtroom like she was about to deliver the State of the Union. She had a binder full of photos and an entourage of 2 HOA board members who clearly had no idea what they'd signed up for. She opened with a passionate speech about community standards and how I was a dangerous precedent if left unchecked. She waved around her photos of my truck, my shed, my lawn, even the lights I'd strung up. She spoke for nearly 15 minutes straight, barely pausing for breath. The judge listened politely, then finally turned to me. "Do you have a response?" I stood, walked up with a single folder, and handed over my documents. "Your Honor, my property is not within the HOA boundaries. Here's the deed, here's the county map." The judge's dismissal landed like a hammer. He barely needed 5 minutes to review my documents before declaring, in no uncertain terms, that Karen's case had no legal basis. "This court will not waste any more time on a matter that is this clear-cut," he said firmly. Case dismissed. Karen's jaw dropped. For someone who had built this entire crusade around being right, it was a public humiliation of the highest order. She tried to stammer out one last protest about community image and standards, but the judge silenced her with a raised hand and a sharp warning about abusing the court system. I walked out calm and collected. Karen, on the other hand, stormed out red-faced, clutching her binder like it was a lifeline. The 2 HOA board members who had tagged along looked like they wanted to melt into the floor. Word spread through the community faster than wildfire. It wasn't just that Karen had lost, it was that she had lost spectacularly, in record time, and in front of witnesses. Neighbors who had been silently annoyed by her antics finally had proof that she wasn't invincible. Over the next few weeks, I noticed a change. Karen stopped patrolling the edge of my property with her phone. No more fake violation notices appeared on my cabin door. She wouldn't even make eye contact if we crossed paths at the local grocery store. In fact, several HOA members quietly approached me to apologize for the drama. Some even admitted they were embarrassed to be associated with her behavior. Apparently, a few had started questioning whether Karen's leadership was actually making their community better, or just making it a laughingstock. For me, the relief was immediate. I went back to enjoying my property, free from harassment, just as I'd intended when I bought it. My shed was still standing, my truck still parked by the side, and my string lights still lit up the porch at night. Karen, meanwhile, had gone from self-appointed queen of the HOA to the punchline of neighborhood gossip. Every time I sat on my porch, watching the sunset over the lake, I couldn't help but smile at the irony. All her noise, all her threats, and all it took to shut her down was 5 minutes of simple, undeniable facts. Sometimes, the best revenge really is just living your life in peace while the entitled dig their own hole.